expectativa é grande. Logo quando eu me inscrevi sabia que ia ser presencial e por isso estava toda entusiasmada, porque pronto, tinha mesmo essa vontade de falar para uma sala cheia de pessoas a sério, mas agora com esta situação toda, pronto, compreendo que não possa ser numa sala, mas a minha expectativa continua a ser muito elevada.
O facto do evento serem moldes diferentes e ao fim e ao cabo ser gratuito, acho que até pode exponenciar ainda muito mais o número de cliques, o número de views.
De facto havia esta expectativa de falar em frente a um público, ou seja, o que é mais diferente este ano é esse facto de não termos um público, de não termos alguém ali à nossa frente a reagir ao que estamos a dizer. Não sabemos se aquilo que estamos a dizer naquele momento está a causar um impacto que esperamos.
Essas pessoas, não estando lá fisicamente, vão estar connosco a seguirem-nos através das redes sociais. Portanto, vamos sentir calor humano, mas de uma forma diferente.
I think, obviously, there's nothing quite as nerve-wracking as giving a talk to a room with, hundreds of people in it. So I probably won't be as nervous, doing a filmed talk as I would be to a live audience.
Sentir as dificuldades e pensar que eu estava a sentir sozinha.
Primeiro, a possibilidade ou não dela avançar, mas também rapidamente percebi que com as pessoas que estavam na organização que havia mais do que massa crítica para se dar esse turnaround.
Mesmo nós começamos a pensar, ok, será que depois de algo tão massivo quanto isto faz sentido eu continuar a falar, no meu caso, de descontentamento?
Para ser muito sincera, fiquei muito triste quando já não era presencial, porque era mesmo essa emoção que eu queria sentir, de ter aquela gente toda a olhar para mim em direto e de ter aquela pressão e aquela adrenalina de ter que ser naquele momento e não poder haver falha nenhuma. Mas, por outro lado, fiquei muito feliz quando soube que o evento ia ser grátis para toda a gente.
O facto de ser open source leva mesmo a que tenhamos um público muito maior.
I think we all took the fact that we could go traveling for granted, and I think it's made a lot of people reassess what's important to them, and I've actually managed to be, I think, more productive than I thought I would be, given that I've been working remotely now for several months, and I was lucky that I was able to finish my experiments.
E a coisa que mais me entusiasmou foi de facto a preocupação que todos tivemos com o próximo. O período de confinamento foi altamente respeitado. Eu vinha à janela, via as pessoas andarem com o espaçamento entre si. Vejo as pessoas hoje em dia com as máscaras colocadas. Portanto, este sentimento de solidariedade é bastante bonito e, sobretudo, de estarmos informados, porque as pessoas sabem.
Foi muito difícil no início, foi um grande choque, mas acho que foi ótimo para parar e pensar nas coisas e perceber que, de facto, nós gastamos imenso tempo em coisas inúteis por convenção.
Olá, lembram-se de mim? Bem-vindos à segunda sessão desta experiência TEDx Digital. Ontem estivemos a refletir acerca dos nossos pontos de vista e hoje desafiamos a explorar as ideias e as crenças dos outros. O desafio para esta sessão, manter a mente bem aberta e estar muito atento à diferente partilha de perspectivas. Iniciamos então esta segunda sessão sob o tema Exploration. Pretendemos que construas uma base fortificada, capaz de fundamentar as tuas ideias e opiniões sobre o mundo. E hoje não estou sozinha, tenho comigo o André Ferreira, Co-Organizer for Curation, e a Mariana Lamas, Co-Organizer for Visual Communication, Media e Marketing. Um nome um bocadinho comprido. Mas bem, malta, eu por acaso tenho mesmo que ir, vocês tomam conta do recado, não é?
Mas isto é assim? Agora ficamos aqui? Eu nem queria aparecer no YouTube. André, faz lá os teus mega moves de dança para ver se entretemos o pessoal.
Mas assim publicamente, isso é para os team buildings, Mariana.
Pronto, está bem. Mas vamos ao que interessa. Aproveita as talks inspiradoras no YouTube, ganha prémios incríveis no nosso Instagram e se reservaste o teu kit TEDxer, não te esqueças de te inscrever nas sessions exclusivas. Tudo isto graças aos nossos parceiros, ao trabalho que desenvolvemos em conjunto e por isso, obrigada.
Epal,
Bounce,
Fever,
e Tasting,
Centro de Joalharia de Lisboa,
Yellow Bus Tour,
Moss,
Lidl,
Odisseias,
Ski Park,
Teleperformance,
o Lisboa,
Alentejo,
Cidade FM,
Alentejo, Ecoboats,
IKEA,
Berlengateiro,
Safarca,
Horto do Campo Grande,
Noesis,
Lisboa Secreta,
Choice,
Via Car,
APTCX,
Zumato,
LED,
Castelvão,
Moinho do Maneio,
Reserva Alecrim,
Jukebox,
Language Craft.
Obrigado.
Bom, vamos dar início a esta grande sessão. O nosso primeiro orador é o Ed Young, um neurocientista que nos fará questionar sobre o nosso cérebro e como ele nos pode iludir acerca da realidade. No fundo, fazer-nos questionar até se somos realmente capazes de pensar por livre vontade. Quão únicos e independentes somos? Quem sou eu? O que é a realidade? Bom, com tantas questões, vamos atirar-nos de cabeça para esta talk.
Hi, my name's Hedy and today I'm talking to you from the Champalamo Foundation in Lisbon where I do neuroscience research. My interest in the brain began at school and I can still remember the day when I learnt that our experience of colour is a fabrication. Colour is not a direct property of matter, instead it's an invention, a useful trick conjured up by our brains as a way of distinguishing light with different wavelengths. Different brains see different things. For example, what looks like a yellow flower to us looks very different to a butterfly that can see ultraviolet light. The reds and greens and yellows that we see in the world around us are not really out there, but in here. That day at school left a big impression on me, and perhaps it's no surprise that I now spend my days trying to understand how the brain computes vision. But as we'll see, the brain fabricates not just our visual experience, but also our entire perception of the world, even our perception of who we are. A good analogy for how we are deceived by our brains is Plato's allegory of the cave. The ancient Greek philosopher imagines a cave where people have been imprisoned from birth and can only look at the wall in front of them, unable to turn their heads. Behind the prisoners is a fire. Objects pass in front of the fire, and the prisoners mistake the shadows on the wall for the actual objects themselves. Similarly, we are prisoners of our own conscious experience, but most of the time, not even aware of it. I study the cortex, which is the wrinkled outer layer of our brains that you can see in cross-section here. The visual cortex lies at the back of our brains, and you can think of it as the projector playing those shadows on the wall, creating those illusory colors and shapes that we mistake for reality. Optical illusions help us see more clearly how this remarkable projector works. In this image, the color of square A looks very different to the color of square B. But actually, the colors of these two squares are exactly the same. Illusions like this one show that our visual perception of the world is not a faithful representation of reality. Rather, it's an interpretation. Our brains have built an internal model of the outside world. Our cortex assumes that a shadow darkens the surface that it is cast upon. So it compensates by making square B seem lighter than it really is, even though these two squares reflect exactly the same amount of light to our eye. It's clear from this illusion that the brain is not a camera. It doesn't passively record the world. Instead, it actively constructs it based on prior expectations. Why would it do this? Well, our brains evolved to find patterns in our environment and to associate those patterns with behavior useful for survival. The ability to detect a face behind the bushes could literally be a matter of life and death. Indeed, we're especially prone to seeing faces, even where there are none. Take an everyday object like a power socket, and we immediately discern a face. Not only that, we can even discern an emotion. But unlike this power socket, we shouldn't be surprised. Being able to rapidly identify faces and mental states of others would have been a useful evolutionary trait, even if having that ability sometimes means you see a face in the cloud or in your washing machine. So it seems that our perception of the world comes as much from the inside out as from the outside in. The fact that our brains can be tricked by illusions or see false patterns doesn't make it dumb. On the contrary, we may see faces in power sockets and washing machines, but we still manage to invent them. And after all, the brain's job isn't to help us see reality as it really is. The brain's job is to help us survive and reproduce in a complex environment. Or, to put it another way, perception is not about seeing truth, it's about having kids. The brain doesn't just construct the outside world, it constructs our inner worlds too. We feel that we can freely act and make decisions, but this too is an illusion. In one study, for example, researchers asked people to make decisions inside a brain scanner. By looking at activity in the frontopolar cortex, just behind our foreheads, researchers could predict what choice people would make before they themselves were even conscious of having made a decision. These findings suggest that our brain can make up its mind as much as 10 seconds before you do. But you don't need a $1 million brain scanner to show that our decisions must be made before we become consciously aware of them. To illustrate this, let's take a typical thought that you've probably had many thousands of times, one you might even be having right now, such as, I'm going to check my phone. Most of us believe that first we think the thought and then we act on it. But in fact, that's not what happens. The thought of wanting to check your phone is preceded by and caused by brain activity that you're not consciously aware of. And that's true of every thought we've ever had. I'm no more conscious of the activity of the cells in my brain causing me to say this sentence than I am of the activity of the cells in my liver. This contradicts the general belief that the conscious self is the originator of our thoughts. In actuality, it's the recipient. Indeed, our conscious self commits an act of plagiarism every moment of every day, claiming ownership of thoughts and actions that it did not create. If we agree that all thoughts are caused by preceding brain activity that we are not consciously aware of, then we have to conclude that our conscious self no more causes our thoughts than it causes our dreams. Our sense of free will can even be manipulated in the operating room. When surgeons electrically stimulated a frontal motor area of the cortex in patients undergoing brain surgery, the patients reported having a conscious intention or urge to move a specific part of their body. More intense stimulation evoked actual movement of this body part, such that the patients experienced ownership of the movement. This shows that we can be made to experience actions as voluntary, not just when they are internally generated by our unconscious brain, but even when they are externally imposed by a brain surgeon. Importantly, though, the opposite can also be true. Patients with schizophrenia may experience their thoughts and actions as being involuntary and controlled by an external agent when they are not. Consider the following quote from one such patient. "They inserted a computer in my brain. It makes me turn to the left or right. It's just as if I were being steered around by whom or what I don't know." Unsurprisingly, the feeling of not being in control of our thoughts and actions can be severely debilitating. Just as our color vision helped us to find food and avoid predators more easily, so too this illusory sensation we have of being in the driving seat rather than in the passengers may well have conferred an evolutionary advantage. Perhaps that is why it's so hard for us to let go of this illusion. We have still not fundamentally changed the way we see ourselves as freely acting agents any more than our primate cousins. This despite the fact that people have discarded the notion of free will for centuries. Take this quote from the 19th century, for example. "The general delusion about free will is obvious." Or this quote from the 20th. "Human beings in their thinking, feeling, and acting are not free, but are as causally bound as the stars in their motions." The first quote is by Charles Darwin, the second by Albert Einstein. Yet here in the 21st century, the vast majority of humanity would not agree with their sentiments. But why does it matter that we understand that we are not free agents? Well, the belief that we are has very real practical consequences and permeates every aspect of our society, from the classroom to the courtroom. It underpins everything from our own feelings of self-worth to the principles of meritocracy. Our concepts of reward and punishment, credit and blame are built upon it. Indeed, the ethos of most criminal justice systems continues to be punishment because you deserve it, rather than rehabilitation because you don't. And we have an amazing capacity and desire to assign agency to other humans, and not just to other humans. Throughout the Middle Ages in Europe, domestic animals such as cows and horses were commonly arrested and put on trial for committing crimes against man. The accused animal would often be granted legal aid in the form of a lawyer who would speak in their defense. Take the case of a trial in 15th century France of a female pig and her 6 piglets. The pig was found guilty of infanticide and sentenced to death by hanging, but her piglets were found not to be complicit in her crime and were instead exonerated, partly because they were deemed to be too young to be responsible. Now, you may laugh at this, but then ask yourself this question. Have you ever felt anger towards your computer when it suddenly crashed or didn't behave as you expected? I'm guessing the answer is probably yes. So if we're capable of assigning free will to a microprocessor made in a factory in China, that should immediately be raising alarm bells right there. At least a pig is a living thing and not an inanimate object. Perhaps another reason for why it's so hard for us to accept that we don't have free will is that it's ingrained not just in our biology, but in our culture, even in our language. To say, I thought this or you did that, carries with it the inherent presumption that we are the creators of our thoughts and the instigators of our actions. It's also more convenient to say, I achieved a high score in the exam, than the more accurate phrase, my brain obeyed the laws of physics, leading me to receive a high score in the exam. Indeed, different languages can shape how we think about causation and agency differently. When describing this accident, for example, in English you could say, he broke the vase. Whereas in Spanish you might be more likely to say, the vase broke or the vase broke itself, and drop the agent of causality. Interestingly, the researchers found that English speakers were more likely to remember who caused an accident than Spanish speakers, and less likely to remember that it was an accident. This suggests that our language can influence the way we think about blame and punishment. So what does all this mean? How can we reconcile ourselves with the fact that our conscious self is no more responsible for the thoughts it thinks than the colors it sees? Well, I think a world without credit and blame can actually be a more compassionate one. For example, Darwin said that acknowledging our lack of free will should teach one profound humility. One deserves no credit for anything, nor ought one to blame others. Einstein said that this awareness kept him from losing his temper with other people. Speaking for myself, I find it much harder to feel negative emotions like anger and resentment towards other human beings than I once did. And I think that this view can make us feel better about our failings and more humble about our successes. Ironically, it may be more liberating to know that we are prisoners than to keep pretending that we are not. Because, unlike the prisoners in Plato's allegory, we can at least turn our heads and know that those shadows dancing on the wall are not real objects.
incrível. Neste momento, eu nem sei se estou aqui a apresentar isto de livre vontade ou se isto foi um truque do meu cérebro aqui no contexto do TEDx Lisboa. E se tal como eu, tu ficaste com perguntas, o que eu te vou aconselhar mesmo é dar uma corrida ao Instagram do TEDx Lisboa para assistir ao live, que está a acontecer mesmo agora. E tal como se esperava, o Heidi deixou-nos a pensar. Ainda que cada um de nós tenha perspectivas diferentes e se calhar com cores aparentemente distintas, ao contrário das alfaces, que são verdes.
Sou a Joana. Do meu nome todo ou não? Desculpem lá. Primeiro e último, ok. Eu estou a ficar nervosa, porque... Como é que eu vou dizer isto?
Decidi entrar para o Lidl. Sei lá porque é que eu decidi entrar para o Lidl.
Gosto pois, eu lembrei-me depois.
Pronto, mas pode. Mas vocês agora, a sério, vocês param de gravar, certo? Pronto. O que eu gosto muito no Lidl, acima de tudo, é uma empresa organizada, certinha, de confiança.
A inovação que a empresa apresenta, e nota-se desde 96 até hoje, foi uma evolução muito grande do papel para a informatização.
Ia também falar na questão da solidariedade, que acho que a empresa que agarrou o projeto da solidariedade na doação de bens alimentares, eu acho que isso foi um impulso positivíssimo para a empresa.
Oh meu Deus, eu ia já dizer pânico!
A melhor razão para trabalhar no Lidl é o desafio diário de criar sonhos, leia-se lojas, e de poder concretizá-los.
Proporcionar-nos a progressão na carreira.
É uma empresa que nos motiva a vir trabalhar todos os dias para crescer.
A maior razão é mesmo esta diversidade de tarefas, de temas, de contacto com vários departamentos, com várias pessoas, com várias temáticas.
Momentos caricatos existem muitos, mas talvez o momento mais marcante foi o tornado em 2011 que este entreposto passou e que me fez ver que realmente é uma grande empresa e conseguiu superar tudo aquilo que era impensável.
Há 23 anos, dentro dos gabinetes, com cinzeiros, fazia-se tudo. Houve um dia que eu recebi uns cheques referente a uma venda dos carros e eu punha sempre o meu cinzeiro por cima do computador. De repente virei-me, como se continuei a fazer outras coisas, e começa-me a cheirar a queimado. Tinha queimado os cheques todos das vendas dos carros.
A melhor razão para trabalhar no Lidl é o poder, o que a empresa me dá a nível de poder trabalhar e esquece.
O que eu mais gosto no Lidl...
Tem stress?
Eu tenho olhado sempre para a câmara, ou não? Pois.
A minha melhor história no Lidl foi o meu primeiro dia de trabalho. E como vinha de uma empresa familiar, cheguei e dei 2 beijos à secretária e um meio abraço. Quando cheguei ao meu posto de trabalho, que era um open space muito grande, e depois de fechar a porta, o meu diretor virou-se para nós dois e disse: então, mas o que é isto aqui? Isto agora é beijoqueiros aqui? Meus amigos, isto aqui não há beijos, aqui é um aperto de mão. Isto não é como estar numa empresa familiar. Mas é giro, que ele depois disse-me, como é que ele me disse? Então você agora vai ser o beijoqueiro. Você vai ficar com alguém ao beijoqueiro.
Muitos colegas vêm ter comigo: tu és do Lidl, é muito fixe, não sei o quê, deve ser porreiro. Eu disse: é sim senhora.
Há pouco tempo descobri que o Lidl é diferente.
O Lidl para mim neste momento eu vejo como uma família, é mais como um trabalho.
Há 23 anos que o Lidl faz parte da minha família.
De seguida, temos como orador o Gonçalo Folgado, um arquiteto que vê a arquitetura além da obra, que vê os habitantes como colegas de trabalho e, acima de tudo, como pessoas com voz. Gonçalo, venha daí a tua perspectiva.
Hello, my name is Gonçalo Folgado. I'm an architect and a urbanist, and I'm here to talk about the power of doing things collectively in a community. But before we go ahead in this talk, I'm going to ask you 3 plain questions. first question is that, have you said hello to your neighbors today? Do you like the neighborhood that you live in? And last but not least, do you have or had this really cool idea that could change your street, your neighborhood, or even your city? I'll bet you did. Now, what if I told you if that could be so much more than an idea? It can be a real project. And all you have to do is start by talking with your neighbors about it. I'm going to explain you how did it happen for us. So, while we were still students at the Faculty of Architecture in 2011, we were in this mixed feeling situation. On one side, we were really excited by the new tools that we were learning about urban transformation, but on the other side, we were really frustrated because all we were doing with those tools were nothing but fictional projects. So we created this collective to do something in a neighborhood across the street, 2 de Maio, my favorite neighbor in Lisbon. And as you can see, 2 de Maio, it's located in a real privileged location. It's really near to the National Palace of Ajuda. It's really near to the Ajuda Universitarian campus, and it's half-walled with Monsanto, Lisbon's urban forest. And on top of this, you got to see the best riverside seeing over the Tagus, and then you have 2 de Maio. The first thing we did as a collective, we just went to the neighborhood and we start by asking the people in the streets in whatever ways could we be useful to them. And soon we have realized that we didn't have the resources to solve all the problems. But we have not given up. We headed back to the university and we have challenged our teachers and the institution itself to do something on the neighborhood. And that's when we got to learn this real life lesson that diagnosing is also a tool of intervention. And once again, with the university, the community, and our newborn collective, we have drawn this urban report about the territory. By doing this, we have understood a lot more about the neighborhood itself, not only the physical plot, but its history and how deeply connected it was with the Portuguese Revolution. I'll explain you. You know, this neighborhood, it was meant to, those houses, what was meant to be attributed to the former regime's employee, a dictatorial one. But then something magical has happened in Portugal in 25 of April of 1974. It was a Carnation Revolution. And the people who were living in the surrounding areas of these under construction building neighborhoods, they were compelled by these revolution values of right to the housing and better life conditions to everyone, and they have organized themselves in order to occupy those houses. And not only occupied, because they have finished the houses with their own resources. Now, knowing a lot more about the neighborhood, based on this urban report, based on our countless perceptions, and mostly on the endless conversations we had with the community, we drew up this local action plan, this time with more funds, with more resources. By the way, we were being funded by the municipality program, BIP-ZIP, which fund local initiatives. So our first principle of activity, it was to empower people by giving them tools. And the first thing that we have done, it was to rehabilitate this old basement, which was no ordinary old basement. In fact, we were touching the neighborhood's heart. We were touching what it was the neighborhood, the former neighborhood child care. It was an open door process where we invited associations, companies, informal groups, universities, public power, citizens, you name it, who wanted to be in that process were more than welcome. One of the most emotional parts of this project is that the ones who had been children on that old basement were helping us now as parents, and that has mobilized a lot of people in the community to do something. Although this was a real participated project, I must stand out one stakeholder in particular, which were the kids. The kids were there from the day one, and they have done it all, since breaking down walls, guarding the materials, thinking about what that space could be. And due to that, they claim that space for their own even nowadays. And the space, it's quite like this. If you want to be part of a collective decision or an improvement process in the neighborhood, that's the place you got to go to. The next one I'll bring you, it's building communities with urban gardens. And while we were still doing Casa para Todos, this new opportunity for us to use our toolbox as architects has popped up, but this time on public space. And there was this small tension between the municipality and the residents. On one side, the municipality wanted to reconfigure the urban gardens, but on the other side, the inhabitants didn't want to wreck their gardens down. So our role on this one, more than doing any kind of architectural procedure, it was more of a mediators. And we have done this 3 steps plan. The first step, it was to re-engage that local group as a community again. They were no longer a community. The second one was to show the different kinds of gardens and the different kinds of agriculture and permaculture techniques that they could be using on their gardens in order to improve the crops. And only by fulfilling these 2 steps, we would go for the architectural procedure. So we have done these seminars where we have invited other agricultures and permaculturists from outside Lisbon in order to change it, to share experiences with the urban farmers from the neighborhoods. Then we have done these workshops of how to do it, how to do your own composer. And to sign a landmark in the community, we have built this aromatic spiral in order to celebrate that they were no longer a group, they were a community back again. And then we have advanced for the architectural procedures and the collaborative planning things. It was quite easy to do this part because all of the other steps were taken. And by telling you this, I'm not saying that this was an easy or a soft process. It wasn't. It took us almost 2 years to make all of this happen, but nowadays it's quite like this. You can see a lot of people on the gardens because this picture was taken in the afternoon, and these people really go early to their garden. But fortunately, that working in community isn't just about architecture and urban planning. You know, Party takes a huge role on this. In fact, Party is identity. And when we started planning and co-designing and co-producing Feira do Galo, Roosters Fair, we felt the community's pulse differently on this. They were more engaged than the usual. And this may happen due to 2 reasons. The first one is that we were bringing back an old tradition of making this party. The older ones knew, the newer generations, they just heard about this party. So they were really excited to experience this. The second one, it was the place. Once again, the place. We were touching in the community's heart. Because in the neighborhood, people often told us that the palace, the National Palace of Ajuda, it belongs to the rich and the powerful. Although the square that this party would take place, it belongs to the people. So they were really engaged to do something in there. And our role on this one, it was just to engage all of the stakeholders in the community to do something to the party, and to help them and to support them to achieve their goals. For instance, the Faculty of Architecture, they have drew all the communication materials, the design, the flyers, providing a really cool and a real dignifying looks for the party. Then the Residents Association, they have operated in a real professional way, like a communication agency. They have thrown these small block parties in order to communicate and to advertise the party itself. And actually, they have done this so well that we, as a collective, were receiving dozens of volunteers on a daily basis to do something and to post the billboards around the parish and the territory to advertise the party itself. But we weren't ready for what was coming next, because when did they came, and we started to see the tents and the stage being assembled, well, this happened. Everybody was there. And this is something that it's impossible for me to pass by a picture or a presentation, because by being there on that particular place and hearing people talk about how could they be part of an improvement process in their own community, in their own street, with their own people, it was something that still today give me the goosebumps. And it was maybe, I don't say maybe, but it was the most impactful thing that we've ever done by the mindset that was generated on that night. By doing Feira do Galo, we have understood that we weren't the only ones doing this kind of projects, grassrooted and participatory ones. There were other collectives that, like us, were doing the same kind of things and standing up for the same values as we did. But there was this small gap, because there wasn't any kind of platform, any kind of local network that I could be access to others' projects and methodologies and stuff. And so we came up with this idea. How about if we create this platform where we can search this kind of different projects by activities, by territories, by organizations, by objectives, you name it. And this is how Fórum Urbano has popped up. In fact, Fórum Urbano isn't just an archive or a repository of projects, it's also a hub of partnerships. Imagine you want to do a gender equality project on your neighborhood, but you didn't know how to do it, how to start it. You can go to the platform, you can search who has done what, you can learn from their experience, but more than that, you can invite them to be partners with you and to do something on your neighborhood. But Fórum Urbano isn't just this, because due to this recent COVID-19 virus, we were challenged by the municipality to map and to systematize again what were the kind of the responses that these local networks were providing. And one more time, there we were in these mixed feeling situations. On one side, we were devastated by the consequences of this virus, but on the other side, our hearts were filled with joy and hope, because we got to see on real time the ability that these local networks have in order to reinvent themselves and to provide real and impactful answers to the communities. We have seen something like simplification of juridical content for the people who are going on layoff. We were seeing these organizations producing this digital content to go online in order to make people's lives easier by getting them entertained. And imagine, these local networks were even doing these crowdsourcing campaigns in order to get these computers and tablets so that the kids could have their online classes in a real fair way. So it was something quite beautiful seeing all of this happen at the same time. One of the coolest things about this platform and the synergy that were made on this time, it was that this platform as this small marketplace where the associations can say what are the goods or the resources that they need, but more than that, what are the resources that they have and that they are willing to share with others once more to cross territories, to create partnerships and synergies. So this is really cool, by the way. Yes, if in 2011, when we have started all of this, I admit it to you, we were playing a deep bluff because we didn't know if this worked out, if participation would be the path to go to. But almost 10 years later, I can say it's not only effective, but it's the right way to go to. Because first, if you bring people to the decision, they will add their value by bringing their perspective. Second, people feel heard, and this is quite cool for their self-esteem. And third, and that's the most important one, by feeling that their opinion is taken in consideration by the ones who decide, people start to believe again in democracy. And if you want to make a change in the world, maybe the best place to start with it's in your neighborhood. Thank you.
Gonçalo chegou e encantou. Se por acaso tens alguma questão para colocar ao Gonçalo, aproveita o live que vai estar a acontecer agora mesmo no Instagram do TEDx o Lisboa e pergunta-lhe o que quiseres. Com esta talk vimos como as diferentes visões juntas constroem uma comunidade mais rica e saudável. É um pouco como construir um puzzle, um jogo de equilíbrio entre os vários interesses comunitários. E por falar em jogo, muitas vezes a melhor parte de um é o que ganhamos no final. Prémios! Vamos lá aqui ser honestos. Quem é que daqui não gosta de ganhar umas boas bolas? Toda a gente anima, e nós temos tudo. Ora, veja, até tenho que ir ler, porque é que decora isto tudo? Ninguém, não? O que é que nós temos? Viagens às Berlengas, aulas de ski, cursos da FLEG, entradas para o Iberanime, estadias no Alentejo e Norte de Portugal, cabazes, descontos em experiências, entre muitos outros. Até tiveram que escrever entre muitos outros, não ficava aqui a descrever prémios até amanhã, não é? Tudo graças aos nossos incríveis parceiros, que vão deixar boquiabertos. Sejam então bem-vindos ao X Challenge 2020, ou 2020, se és cool, o jogo épico que o TEDx Lisboa preparou para ti, 100% vivido no nosso Instagram. Desafiamos-te então a partir à aventura e ajudar-nos a descobrir a cura para um mal que nos tem vindo a assombrar. Ora, escuta. O nosso próximo orador também nos vai trazer um jogo, ou melhor, o que nós muitas vezes não vemos num jogo. Estamos a falar de Pedro Passos e da sua visão fascinante sobre o que os dados nos dizem de um jogo de futebol. Sem mais demoras, passa a bola ao Pedro.
It all starts many years ago when I was a rugby coach of 32 great under-18 rugby players. On that time, everything that we did on practice was related with gaps. So my major concern was, how can I coach my team, my players, in a way that can learn how to use gaps? Gaps are an expression of space, and as expressed by the faces of both defenders here, this space will tend to close quite fast. But the thing is, this space between defenders can close in a non-linear way. Sometimes it seems that space will close very slowly and then suddenly close quite fast, whereas other times it seems that the space between defenders will close quite fast, but then space remains. The only thing that I know was that space offers opportunities of action, opportunities for the attack to create threatening situations for the defense. So my inquietness was, how can I create learning environments where my players learn to use something that is continuously changing as space-time gaps? That's when I start studying social interactions. On a significant part of social daily interactions, space and time play a crucial role in human behavior. For instance, when you need to move on a crosswalk, when the green light turns on, the way we move is highly influenced by the space that is left available between the subject on my right side and on my left side, but also by the trajectories of the subjects who come in the opposite direction. Well, the same is true for the so-called zipper effect in a traffic jam. When we are driving our car and we get close to an intersection point and we saw a car coming from the right side, usually we slow down and let the car enter behind us. If everybody follows this space-time rule, the traffic jam will flow very easily, and usually it works, with the exception of the weekends. Years later, as a researcher, I got the chance to get access to huge datasets of positional data. So I can have the chance to satisfy my curiosity and decrease my anxiety regarding space-time gaps. That's why the theme for my talk today is regarding with space, time, technology and possibilities of pass in football. But for those who are less familiar with football, let me tell you why the pass is so important. It is with the pass that the team can remain with ball possession. Also, it is with the pass that the ball carrier can explore the space between defenders, aiming to put the ball to a support player located closest to the opposing goal, which increases the chances to score. Well, football, it is not much different from the other social interactions. When we look to a football field, something that it is not missing is space. Even when we put 22 players within this space, still had a considerable amount of space. But the thing is, this space changes, constrained by ball displacements and also by the relative positions to the other players within the field. Each player needs to move. And when they move, they change the spatial configurations, which consequently will change the opportunities of actions that were created. Coaches own an enormous ability to see how the space is being used. They can see what are the opportunities that were created by the space that was left available between defenders. However, as we enter in the third decade of the 21st century, industrial tools as drones, 3D printers, virtual reality devices and GPS become consumer products, and they can change the way we analyze football. In 2000 was developed the first GPS prototype to be worn by a football player. 15 years later, 2015, football players were authorized to use GPSs during official competitive matches. And 3 years later, in 2018, it was authorized to the performance analysis staff conveying information to the technical staff which is seated on the bench concerning positional data during the course of a match. Which means that data, if properly used, can change the course of a match. The thing is, when we got access to huge datasets of positional data, if we do not know what we are looking for, data can become incomprehensible. However, positional data, the wealth that had is on these spatial coordinates, X and Y coordinates. With the spatial coordinates, we can calculate each player current position on the field, but also we can estimate where each player can be in the very close future. Well, up to a certain point, we can say that with the positional data, we can predict the future. Yes, a very close future, about 1 second, but it is possible to calculate which are the current opportunities of action for one player, but also estimated what are the opportunities of action that will become available in a very near future. I know what I was looking for if I got access to positional data. This is a draft that I drew 4 years ago. I used to draw my ideas. The colored circles over there represent a heat map, and they identified the areas of the field where passing opportunities occurred often. However, to put this research project ongoing, I need another sort of knowledge. I need someone from mathematics, I need someone from physics, and I also need someone from computer sciences. Up to a certain point, we need to recognize our limitations. It is very important not being alone and create a multidimensional team. So I move on to my other research projects, and one day I receive an email from a theoretical physicist to work with me on a startup. And the email said something like this: Pedro, I really like to work with you on the startup. You know that I'm doing my PhD thesis, but I would like to do something else related with sports science research. Do you have something for me? You know my computer skills, you know that there is no impossible for me. And this part of the sentence was the trigger that made me think that, well, this guy might be the right guy to help me on this project. So I said, yes, I do have something for you. What about creating a landscape of passing opportunities in football? Well, that sounds good. Send me the rules, I will write down the code. So we start working on the project. We made several drafts, but one day the project stopped. A PhD thesis is highly demanding. It was his priority, and we stopped the project. Again, I move on to my other research projects, and a few months later, I receive another email, this time from a Spanish guy, which was a master's student in Ireland and in Netherlands. And the email said something like this: Pedro, we do not know each other. I am a master's student, almost finished my thesis. I would like to move forward for a PhD program. Do you have something for me? Well, Yes, I have. What about a landscape of passing opportunities in football? Well, that sounds good. I'm going to Lisbon. Shall we meet? Yes, of course. So I come to Lisbon, we met, and in the middle of a couple of beers, we drew the PhD program. On that time, we know that we need someone else. That's when I called to a mechanical engineering, highly skilled in mathematics. We apply for a PhD grant, which we got it. But now we need data, more data and more accurate data to train the algorithm. That's when I decided to call to a sports scientist who work in the Barça Innovation Hub. I present the project. He was quite enthusiastic with the project. He presented to the boss and the boss said yes. And since then, we are collaborating with the Barça Innovation Hub. And this is the great team who embraced this project. With the team formed, we restart the project. And the first step was, how can we create a footprint which identify each passing opportunity? So the rules are these. We have the ball carrier and support player current and estimated positions, and we have two potential passing lines. We also have the defender's current and estimated position. If none of the defenders will be able to touch any of the potential passing lines, a geometrical shape will be formed. And when it will be formed, we can paint this geometric shape, which identifies a footprint of each passing opportunity. Now imagine that during the course of a match, we can overlay all these footprints. By doing this, we can create a heat map, which represents what is a landscape of passing opportunities in football. And this is the output that we got so far. On the left side of the screen, you have an animation of the player's positional data during a match. And on the right side of the screen, you have the heat maps of both teams and their analysis. But now we have our first question. Is it possible that the algorithm can identify the differences between the two landscapes of both teams in competition? This is the heat map of the blue team. And we can see they can create passing opportunities on the central lane, a little bit biased to the right side. Whereas the red team can create passing opportunities all over the field. So the first question, yes, the algorithm can identify the differences between both teams and their analysis. But then we have a second question. Is it possible that the algorithm can capture if something happened during the course of a match and something happened? One of the players from the blue team got a red card, which means that he was sent off of the field, which means that the blue team played almost for half an hour only with 10 players. They need to readapt the spatial configuration, which consequently changed the passing opportunities, as we can see in the heat map of the blue team. However, the most interesting result was on these, how the red team adapts to these changes on the blue team spatial configuration. Instead of creating passing opportunities all over the field, they concentrate the efforts to create threatening situations on the central lane of the field. So the algorithm can identify the changes on these tactical configurations on one of the teams. So then we have our third question. But before moving on, allow me to speak a bit about tactical formations for those who are less familiar with football. For sure, you already heard to talk on the TV about these combinations of numbers, 4-4-2, 4-3-3, whatsoever. These are tactical formations and identified how many players should play on each part of the field. For instance, our team always play on a 4-3-3, which means 4 defenders, 3 midfielders, 3 attackers. The thing is, it is very difficult during the course of a match to maintain this tactical formation. Again, constrained by ball displacements and by the changes in the relative position to the others, players need to move. So the third question was, is it possible that a team that played always with the same tactical formation, 4-3-3 as our team, can display a similarity in the landscapes that were created across several matches? We create the heat maps for 5 matches of our team. Also, we move forward and we found out a method that allows us to quantify the difference between these images. The output is quite easy to analyze. The coldest colors, the blue ones, identify a high similarity between the images, whereas the warmest colors, the yellow, the orange and the red display allows similarity between images. We can see here by the matrix on the right side of the screen that between the first and the fourth match, they are quite similar. The most interesting result is this one, the fifth match, quite different from all the others. We want to know why. We watched the match again to see why this happens, what was the main reason. And one possible reason was the opponents play with the defensive line upwards in the field, quite close to our own midfield, which create a high pressure, which decrease the space that our team had to perform passes. Again, the algorithm was able to capture these changes in tactical formations. What about time? The time that each passing opportunity was available. We calculate this for each one of the players. And we saw that, for instance, the right center back, every time that the passing opportunity was created, they had, on average, 1.2 seconds to perform a pass. Whereas the midfielders, every time that creates a passing opportunity, it had less than a second to perform a pass. But the most interesting result was this one, the strikers. Every time that a passing opportunity was created, they had approximately half a second to receive that ball. These results left us overwhelmed. We know that the time that the passing opportunities were available was short. We never thought that had so tiny time windows. And these results emphasize the relevance of an accurate perception regarding space-time gaps. Practice do this. With practice, players become fine-tuned regarding when and where and how long each passing opportunity remain available. So perhaps the core business of training team sports should be based on how to create an accurate perception and action regarding space-time gaps. And this is our magic number, which had a mixed feeling of anxiety and happiness. Up to a certain point, someone asked, did you know that your model is really capturing passing opportunities? Well, objectively, we don't know. But as we had in our dataset all the effective passes, we do the following thing. We run the algorithm 1 second before each effective pass. The idea was to see if the model had the ability to guess that an effective pass was about to happen. And on average, for the 5 matches under analysis, the model can identify 80% of the passes that really happen. And this result boosts our confidence in the model. We can create a landscape of passing opportunities which can identify the vulnerability on the defense, but also the dangerousness of the attack. My expectation for the future is that one day, football analysis will be like Formula One, where we can gather information from highly advanced technology with the knowledge that comes from years of experience of coaches' eyes. Coaches own an enormous gut feeling concerning what happens within the field. No one knows better than the coach what happens within the field. Now imagine a coach with a good gut feeling, but powered with data. Those who can, or dare, to ally the specific knowledge from a specific domain as football, with the knowledge that can come from mathematics, physics and computer sciences, perhaps we'll find out the Holy Grail. Thank you very much for your attention.
e participa num live com o próprio. A visão de jogo do Pedro é de facto uma perspectiva diferente daquilo que se passa dentro de 4 linhas. Mas e se o jogo for fora destas 4 linhas? Para uma empresa, um plano de jogo tem de incluir várias variáveis. Para a IKEA, o que importa não é os resultados que atingimos, mas sim como os atingimos. Vamos ver como jogam em casa.
A IKEA, como uma empresa global de grandes dimensões, tem a responsabilidade, mas também a grande oportunidade de fazer a diferença e de ter de facto um impacto positivo nas pessoas e no planeta, ao mesmo tempo que cresce o negócio. A sustentabilidade está integrada em tudo o que fazemos. Historicamente, pertence ao DNA da IKEA. Em tudo o que fazemos, tentamos sempre fazer mais com o mínimo de recursos. Na IKEA não gostamos de desperdício. Acreditamos que um negócio sustentável, do ponto de vista económico, do ponto de vista ambiental e do ponto de vista social, é um negócio que poderá perdurar para o futuro, portanto, para os próximos 75 anos.
A Ana falou de estratégias a longo prazo que são tão importantes para garantirmos o futuro das nossas próximas gerações. E que tipo de iniciativas é que têm vindo a desenvolver com base nessas medidas a longo prazo?
É uma estratégia que está construída em 3 dimensões. Uma dimensão social, uma dimensão ambiental, de impacto no clima e no planeta, e uma dimensão mais de negócio, de vida em casa, neste caso, de uma vida mais sustentável em casa. Isto significa que temos que ser muito mais eficientes nas nossas operações, utilizar energias de fontes renováveis. Do ponto de vista da circularidade, não só o design dos produtos deve ser alterado, por forma a prolongar a sua vida, dar-lhes muitas e diferentes funções, permitir que os produtos possam ser atualizados, revendidos, ter uma nova vida. Portanto, o design circular e os serviços circulares são muito importantes, mas também a forma como nós utilizamos matérias-primas. A IKEA pretende, até 2030, que todos os nossos produtos tenham matérias-primas de origem ou renovável ou reciclável. Finalmente, a terceira dimensão tem a ver com a vida em casa e a IKEA pretende inspirar e ajudar mais de 1.000 milhões de pessoas a viverem uma vida melhor, mas dentro dos limites do planeta. Para o fazer, temos que apresentar soluções às pessoas que lhes permitam pequenos passos em casa, que reduzem ao mesmo tempo o seu impacto ambiental, mas que lhes são acessíveis, que lhes são convenientes, que lhes são fáceis e que não custam mais dinheiro.
A Ana tocou aqui num ponto muito importante, que é o de sermos mais sustentáveis em casa, também ser benéfico em termos de economia de recursos para as famílias. Como é que podemos então ser mais sustentáveis em casa?
Uma vida mais sustentável em casa passa pela redução do consumo de energia, pela redução do consumo de água, por evitar desperdício alimentar e nós, com pequenas alterações, podemos contribuir para estas melhorias. Por exemplo, utilização de eletrodomésticos mais eficientes, como placas de indução, utilização de iluminação LED, que é muito mais económica do que as lâmpadas incandescentes tradicionais, utilização de redutores de caudal nas torneiras, nos chuveiros, poderá reduzir o consumo de água até 40% e a parte do desperdício alimentar, cada português desperdiça em média quase 100 kg de alimentos por ano e se nós pudermos reduzir isto para metade é um impacto enorme. Como é que isto pode ser feito? Comprando apenas o que precisarmos, tendo sempre presente tudo o que temos na despensa, tudo o que temos no frigorífico, para evitar que se estrague, que passe o prazo de validade. A forma melhor de conseguirmos isto é tendo recipientes para alimentos adequados. Recipientes transparentes, para que possamos ver o seu conteúdo, e recipientes herméticos para manter a frescura.
Quando fala de casa sustentável, está a dar efetivamente imensas dicas de poupança que podemos aplicar nas nossas casas. Mas esta casa sustentável da IKEA é um projeto a nível nacional? Qual é que vai ser o seu impacto?
A Casa Sustentável é um projeto que nos é muito querido na IKEA Portugal. É um projeto que partilha dicas, ideias, soluções e inspiração para uma vida mais sustentável em casa, mas alia essa sustentabilidade à poupança, que é tão importante para os portugueses. Nesta casa, um casal pode poupar até 500 euros por ano na redução da sua fatura de eletricidade, da sua fatura da água e também evitando desperdício alimentar. Mas as soluções que nós propomos para os nossos clientes e visitantes vão para além da casa sustentável. Em todas as nossas lojas e também no nosso site, tentamos partilhar ideias, dicas, produtos, soluções que inspirem os portugueses a viverem uma vida mais sustentável em casa, de forma acessível.
A IKEA mostrou-nos que podemos ser mais sustentáveis em casa, tendo também em conta o bem-estar dos nossos vizinhos. A verdade é que todos temos de habitar o mesmo planeta, a mesma casa-mãe, e portanto importa-nos preservar esta casa para o bem-estar de todos e também para as futuras gerações. E quem melhor para nos mostrar essa casa do que alguém que já nos mostrou inúmeras vezes as maravilhas desta casa através da sua voz inigualável. Estamos a falar de Eduardo Rego, alguém que se tem dedicado a mostrar o que de melhor existe no nosso mundo e agora o que de melhor podemos fazer por ele. Vamos ver!
Se folhearem a história, não encontram nenhum momento com tantos problemas em cima da mesa do mundo. Nunca foi tão necessário parar para pensar como hoje. E eu estou aqui simplesmente para agitar as águas do mar em que caímos. Da mesmice. A vida, o milagre da vida, ocorreu há 4 bilhões de anos. Nós, seres humanos, surgimos aqui há apenas 200 mil anos. No entanto, conseguimos quebrar o equilíbrio que é tão essencial à vida na Terra. É urgente pensar a sustentabilidade. E a sustentabilidade começa por nós. Precisamos de parar para pensar e voltar para dentro. Refletir. Acalmar o stress em que vivemos, porque a sustentabilidade, a verdadeira sustentabilidade, acontece a partir de nós. Tudo o resto virá por acréscimo. Se repararem, nós vivemos muito a partir daquilo que recebemos da comunicação social. E hoje vivemos numa autêntica Babel. Não são apenas os jornais, que hoje poucos leem, não são apenas as televisões e as rádios, os festivais, todos os polos que divulgam cultura ou comunicam, mas toda esta pangeia virtual em que caímos. Estamos a perder o pé, estamos a viver na cloud. Já repararam a barafunda em que estamos metidos? Já pensaram no horizonte onde isto pode levar-nos? Depois não são apenas as notícias que muitas vezes são falsas e cada vez mais falsas. É a confusão que existe no seio familiar, por exemplo. Os conflitos, as guerras, a mortandade, os assassínios. Não é possível. A humanidade só se encontra quando voltar ao valor do amor. Isso é a grande fonte da sustentabilidade. Mas se repararmos e esticarmos um pouco mais a nossa leitura sobre aquilo que nos rodeia, os negócios hoje são escuros e cada vez mais escuros. A política, a banca, a própria saúde, não direi tanto em Portugal, mas no mundo em geral, porque quero falar para o mundo, anda muito mal. É um bem público, é o grande bem que sustenta a vida. Nós temos que olhar para isto. Tem que chegar a todos este valor. A corrupção campeia. Há falta de amorosidade, falta de sincronicidade, falta de articulação das partes para que o bem comum, o bem maior, seja salvaguardado. E com isto tudo, nós estamos a caminho da falência do sistema. Temos que parar para pensar. Aquilo que verdadeiramente pode cantar vitória no meio disto tudo é a tecnologia. Não vou falar contra ela nem pouco mais ou menos. Ela é importantíssima. Mas temos que a pôr ao nosso serviço. Não podemos viver na pangeia virtual, completamente enfildados aos telemóveis, aos computadores e por aí fora. Há tempo para tudo na Terra. Tempo para nascer, tempo para viver e tempo para morrer, em sentido mais largo. Temos que dar o tempo a cada coisa. Como é que nós podemos sair disto? Desde logo criando uma espécie de Global Academy. Um ensino diferente que comece com as crianças e crie grandes pensadores, depois nas universidades, politécnicos e outros institutos de ensino. Uma nova pedagogia, uma pedagogia diferente, que nos leva a ter grandes condutores da comunidade humana. Nunca mais mentecaptos na cadeira do poder. Nunca mais. E não é só pela ditadura que eles possam veicular. É pelos malefícios quase eternos que eles podem semear na sociedade. A educação, dizia o nosso querido Nelson Mandela, é a melhor arma para mudar o mundo. Vamos fazer isso? A globalização trouxe-nos muitas coisas boas. Quebrou fronteiras, falamos todos uns com os outros em tempo praticamente real, muitas vezes real, mas trouxe outro conceito, que é o da casa comum. Estamos tão próximos. Nunca estivemos tanto. Mas falta-nos uma casa para o encontro das culturas. Falta-nos uma casa para o ritual da partilha. E eu proponho que ela exista em algum lugar do mundo. Penso que Portugal é um país de eleição para esse efeito. Mas se não acontecer, seja onde for, o mundo é pequeno, tornou-se pequeno com a globalização. E o que proponho é a réplica daquilo que é a Terra propriamente. Uma cúpula devidamente construída ecologicamente, para sermos consequentes e coerentes com aquilo que dizemos, que essa é uma das falhas do nosso tempo, é não haver alinhamento com o que pensamos, dizemos e fazemos. Não há alinhamento. É preciso construir isto. Nessa casa, que eu penso pode ter a configuração do hemisfério norte, assente sobre uma folha gigante, para nos fazer lembrar que jamais podemos fazer incursões malucas, seja por onde for, sem pensar no equilíbrio da natureza, que é a fonte para a paz que precisamos. Nesse lugar, eu proponho que haja um grande ecrã com tecnologia touch a reproduzir o mapa do mundo. E a plateia pode ir sempre ao palco e ficar em algum ponto, tendo como resposta, do outro lado, no Serengeti, no Alasca, whatever, uma equipa de cientistas que responde aos nossos anseios, às questões que possamos colocar. E há tantas. Isto dá-nos a noção de família. Põe-nos a interagir, coisa que a globalização não nos deu. Na programação de cada dia deste, que chamo Santuário da Consciência Global, eu proponho que o país que faça, entre comas, anos nesse dia, esteja presente e dê contas ao mundo daquilo que anda a fazer para o bem-estar da comunidade global. no dia 10 de junho, Portugal será chamado, com o seu Presidente da República, o Primeiro-Ministro, o Ministro do Ambiente, todos aqueles que, naquele momento, forem importantes para o diálogo, para a reflexão, são chamados ali para dar contas à comunidade internacional do que anda a fazer para o bem comum. Isto é simplesmente maravilhoso. E aí vamos poder fazer outra coisa linda, que parte de um movimento que criei há uns 4 anos, depois do desafio de uma universidade portuguesa. Vamos poder certificar os próprios países em função daquilo que andam a fazer de bem. O movimento que criei chama-se Loving the Planet. É lindo. Nunca mais consegui parar de olhar para ele, focar a minha consciência naquilo. Mas preciso do vosso envolvimento. Preciso do vosso engagement, do vosso compromisso, commitment. Nós precisamos urgentemente de ter um caso de amor com a vida. E é possível por este caminho. Um livro que me acompanha sempre é este. Tem atravessado gerações, tem sensibilizado milhões de pessoas no mundo. O seu autor, o Saint-Exupéry, pôs na boca do príncipezinho estas palavras que são uma mensagem eterna. O essencial é invisível aos olhos. Por amor de Deus, pensem nisto. Deixem o rebanho e foquem-se, cada um em si. Eu tenho a certeza que a saída para um mundo melhor está em cada um de nós. Portanto, agora diretamente para cada um, deixa o rebanho. Tu és o caminho. Não é possível chegar à felicidade global sem a assunção destes valores. Obrigado.
Depois de sabermos há muito das alterações climáticas, chegou o tempo de agir. Senão, corremos o risco de perder a natureza com que o Eduardo Rego sempre nos fascinou. Se também ficaste deslumbrado com esta voz da nossa geração, vai até à nossa página de Instagram e vê o live com o Eduardo Rego. Não nos cansamos de agradecer a todos os que estão desse lado. Obrigada por, mesmo distante, continuares a acreditar no espírito de partilhar ideias. O Kit TEDxer é a nossa forma de te comprovar que tornas a nossa comunidade mais forte. Esperemos que gostes de todas as surpresas que temos incluídas para ti. Se ainda não te inscreveste em todas as sessões que queres ver no sábado, o que é que estás à espera? E hoje, até às 23h59, podes ir ao nosso Instagram e participar no X Challenge. Tens um batalhão de mais de 30 prémios incríveis à espera, como idas às berlengas e estadias ao longo do país. Sinceramente, a única coisa que eu tenho pena é não poder habilitar a ganhar mesmo isso para mim. Amanhã voltamos às 18 com temas como a revolução do sistema educativo, o outro lado das migrações e a importância das histórias na comunicação. Até amanhã!
The brain's job is to help us survive and reproduce in a complex environment. Or, to put it another way, perception is not about seeing truth, it's about having kids.
They will have their value by bringing their perspective. Second, people feel heard, and this is quite.
Up to a certain point, we need to recognize our limitations. It is very important not being alone and create a multidimensional team. So I move on.
O movimento que criei chama-se Loving the Planet. É lindo. Nunca mais consegui parar de olhar para ele.
Guys, all of you here today, you've heard of Netflix, right? And I bet that almost all, if not all of you, know what Facebook is and probably have an account.
Estou curiosa de ver os resultados destes avanços tecnológicos no sistema de educação. Será que vamos tornar-nos todos um gênio?
At specific moments, I realized the importance of being home and surrounded by family. this situation last.
Portugal, na verdade, temos uma realidade com quase 11 mil colaboradores, mais de 10 edifícios e acabamos.
He said I was too plastic. He said I was trying to imitate all the great voices I used to listen to on national radio stations.
Da, 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 da.